The message beeped. She lifted the phone, thumb trembling over send. Yet the draft still read, "I never said I'm sorry." The screen's glow mixed with the harsh hallway mirror flash that caught a lipstick smear on her collar, wrong in crimson under fluorescent light. The call vibrated again, unanswered, and the silence swallowed it. Her pulse a ledger of truths left unpaid. The apartment's thermostat whirred its usual drone as she thumbed the screen. The guilt was untouched. The bathroom light remained on. Down the hall, a neighbor's radio burbled a jingle for an impossible serial. Footsteps receding. She set the phone face down on the chipped entry table beside the brass key bowl. The lipstick smear caught in the dull metal like a warning she'd left herself. She rinsed her hands, watching water fringe away the last of the hallway glare, then dried them on the threadbare college towel. Unpaid bills sat stacked on the counter, one with her viscous pen looped through the paper, untouched since last night. From the kitchen, the kettle clicked and hissed on the stove, her only concession to routine. Steam curled, carrying the faint scent of lemon and yesterday's coffee. The hallway mirror reflected her, steadying. She straightened the coat on the banister, smoothed the collar twice, and exhaled slowly. Nothing in the apartment shifted. The city murmured beyond the window, indifferent and slow. Jona dropped his messenger bag inside the door, but the clatter against tile was swallowed by Mara's own knife work. She sliced winter citrus for tea, the knife striking hard enough to splatter juice along the board. When she lifted her head, he was already watching where light hit the countertop, where the ragged edge of the envelope she hadn't thrown out caught the glow. "I found it under the couch," Jona said, voice low as if walking through sand. "But if it keeps you from letting me in, we've already lost time." He stepped closer. The kettle whistled a warning. Mara pinched the envelope, twisting it until the paper shivered. "You can't just act like guilt is something you put in a jar and set on a shelf. That's easy. The harder part is letting it sit there, not dragging it through every apology." She slammed the envelope against the counter. It didn't tear, but the sound made Jona flinch. A beat later, she slid it toward him again, slower this time. "If you want to be with me, you have to accept that weight is part of what I bring. Not because I choose to hurt, but because I remember." Her fingers trembled. Jona caught the edge before it fell. He drew a breath. "Then let's face it together. Tomorrow, I'll drive you back to the center. You can hand those letters to the clinic staff, where they belong. I'll sit in the waiting room. You won't have to do it alone." Her jaw clenched. She nodded once, sharp. "You don't get to fix everything, but you can be here when it feels like I'm sinking." Jona exhaled. He knelt briefly to tie his shoe, hands tight on the laces, then stood and poured tea, sliding the mug across the counter to her. She took it without looking away. Heat fogged her lashes for a second, but she didn't blink. "Tell me when you get tired of holding me up," she said, soft, almost a dare. "I won't," he said, and the kettle hissed again, rising to a simmer. They stood with the mug between them, not resolved, but tethered to the moment. The guilt stayed, heavy as the mug, but it no longer knocked the cup off the tabletop. Mara slid the kitchen chair back with a sharp scrape, deathly quiet until the metal legs on linoleum broke the stillness. She set a stack of clinic pamphlets on the table, shuffled through the papers, then opened a paperback notebook. The page she opened was filled with cramped, cross-hatched entries. Jona, still in yesterday's shirt, lingered at the counter with a cooling mug. He didn't ask. He waited until she pushed the notebook toward him. He flipped to the most recent entry. Mara said nothing, but the words were raw. Commitments made and broken. Nights she ignored his calls, letters she never mailed. Jonah's thumb rubbed the edge of a sentence that trailed off in a loop of ink. He heard the clinic instructions echoing, forms, signatures, consent. And the notebook sat between them like a witness. "You're not planning on keeping all this to yourself anymore, are you?" he said, not looking up, voice clipped. She exhaled hard, leaning forward until her forehead nearly touched the table. "I told you I kept tabs. There are 3 more sheets in the envelope." She tapped where it peeked from under a cookbook, a faint, dried coffee stain. "I didn't intend to burden you with the details, but the truth keeps looping. And every time I try to get close, I remember I never apologized properly for the broken promises." The air tightened. Her fingers drummed the edge, the notebook vibrating. Jonah dragged a chair over. "Give me the papers," he said, softer now. But his pulse drummed in his ears. He shoved the notebook back to her. "Let's go through them. We have to file this clinic stuff tonight. And you can't keep another confession tucked away while I fill out forms for you." He picked up the envelope anyway, opening it in one sweeping motion so a slip of paper fell out. Mara's jaw fluttered. Inside were names. People she let down. Deadlines she ignored. Jonah read a line about a canceled appointment he'd never known. "You never told me you skipped that," he said, the tension snapping like a wire. "You didn't let me rebook it. You just pretended it didn't matter." Mara's shoulders slumped, because every time I tried, I heard him in my head, you know? Guilt shouting louder than you ever could. She grabbed a pen, crossed out a name, then wrote, "Clinic intake, Jona, please." Jonah's breath hitched. He set the slip down and reached for the phone. "We are going there together," he said, eyes flicking to her hand. "I'm not filling out anything for you alone." Mara grabbed her coat and slid it over her shoulders, ignoring a tremor in her hands. She closed the envelope and placed it atop the pamphlets. "Then let's go," she replied, voice steady but raw. "We file everything tonight, no matter how much it stings." He nodded, and for a heartbeat the guilt remained between them, heavy. But there was movement. He walked toward the door, keys already in his fist, while Mara double-checked the stack, making sure nothing was left unsaid before they left. The guilt hadn't lifted, but now it would be part of the forms they submitted together. Jonah sat cross-legged on the rug. Mara's envelope of confessions opened beside him. He ran a finger down a page where her handwriting piled over itself, stopping at a line that hadn't yet made it into their shared conversations. This one says, "I keep hitting rewind because punishment is the only way I prove I deserve love," he said, sounding more like he was reading invoice numbers than a plea. Mara dropped another sheet onto the coffee table, the corner skittering across the wood. "So now you read my guilt out loud and wonder why it hasn't let go," she snapped, sweeping the papers into a rough fan. "I told you, I still keep score for every mistake. I'm writing it down so it doesn't disappear. That's how I keep myself honest. That's how I keep myself punished." Jonah lifted the notebook, the spine creaking. "You called it punishment again," he repeated softly. "Even here you wrote you can't see forgiveness because you're still paying for every wrong. You don't let me help because I'm not part of the debt you keep carrying." Mara leaned back, elbows on the chair arms, eyes hard. "I can't let it go because that means I stop proving it. Loving you while I'm not broken, the guilt insists that's a lie. When you say you're here, I hear, 'Come back and hurt me so I don't forget.' I tie you to the last time I failed because then the love feels real. Otherwise, it's just kindness I don't deserve." He swallowed. Then I'm stuck watching you set fire to the bridge we're building. You say I'm in it, but you keep throwing yourself into the flames to keep the guilt warm. I can walk you to the clinic, but I can't undo what you keep doing alone. Her hands trembled as she slid the envelope toward him. Maybe I do it because I'm scared forgiveness would make me soft again, she said, lowering her voice. But I also know that keeping it private didn't let anything change. Every time I let it sit in me, you felt it. You've been gentle with me, Jona, but you've also been waiting for me to confirm I'm not beyond forgiveness. He pulled one of the forms toward the lamp, the glow catching the edge. Then let me hold the pencil. You finish the paperwork tonight. I'm not letting you go to the clinic trying to rewrite the past alone. But I also won't watch you punish yourself quietly anymore. She nodded once, brittle, then took the pen from his hand. Her strokes were deliberate. I'll write down the truth, and I'll read it with you. Nothing I do tonight is just for me. This time I'll let it hit the counselor too, not just the pages. She handed him a slip with sentences she had just crafted. Jona read it aloud, each word softer than the last. I will stop keeping guilt private because it seeps into every shared breath. I am asking for forgiveness, but I am also choosing to stop tying my love to punishment. A pause. If the clinic needs proof I'm serious, this is it. The room shifted. Mara leaned forward, shaking slightly. But the tension loosened as she placed the finished form on the clean stack. Jona slid the envelope back toward her. Then let's make sure it all gets there, he said, standing to gather the papers. No more dragging the weight under the rug. Tomorrow we hand everything over together. She matched his motion, fingers brushing his as she collected the envelope. The contact held just long enough for both to know the guilt wasn't private anymore. And the bridge they were rebuilding had more than heat, it had light. The fluorescent kitchen light hummed as Jona spread Mara's clinic packet across the table. The forms were already half filled. Names, dates, checkboxes. A sticky note slid from beneath the stack. Mara's cramped reminder to own every moment. Her pen hovered over the next section, and she shook it once before letting the ink start again. Jona slid a fresh sheet in front of her. Let's put in the files what we said at the counselor, he said, voice clipped to a steady rhythm. Tell them we're going with you, that we'll hand over the confessions together. He tapped the pen. Tell them what I told you. I can't let myself forget that guilt is eating the color out of us. Mara's shoulders tightened. I know. Her teeth pressed into her lower lip. Every time I try to say it, it sounds like a plea for redemption I don't deserve. She wrote slowly, the tip dragging as if through mud. We both know guilt keeps me honest. Jona held up his hand. Not honest, he said. Shrinking. You wrap love in guilt like a hymn, but it makes it hard to breathe, Mara. His fingers found the edge of her wrist. You're saying sorry, but I keep expecting punishment. It makes the quiet between us feel heavy. She exhaled sharply. So what am I supposed to do? Scrawl. Say I'm innocent? No. His grin was brittle. But you can stop signing your apologies like they're the only thing you're allowed to offer. When you grab my face and whisper, I don't deserve you. I hear the devotion, but I also hear the noose tightening. The more we keep love tied to those confessions, the less room there is for anything else. Her pen stilled. The tip lifted off the paper and hovered above the line where she'd been writing, then hovered over nothing. If I take the guilt off, what's left? Jona slid the envelope she'd brought, thick, edges worn, from his lap and set it between them. Truth, he said. Not redemption, not even forgiveness yet. just truth that we hand in together. Let's keep the guilt from turning our affection into a ritual we dread. Mara cracked a small, uneven laugh. You make it sound like I'm a cult leader. She looked up, eyes raw. You're the one who promised to carry the paperwork tonight. I'm still carrying it, he said, dipping his pen. But I'll carry it with you. Write the part about how telling the counselor feels like a confession and a beating at once. Write how every time you call me, you say my name almost like it's something holy. Let them see that glow and the weight. She scribbled, the tremor easing into deliberate strokes. My love feels sacred and suffocating. She slid the paper toward him. Is that what you needed me to say? He didn't take it, but he rested his palm over hers for a moment. It's what we need to hold before we hand it over. Mara pushed the paper away, tears brimming without a sound. Then help me finish. Jona leaned in, filling the next lines. Names, a promise to deliver their shared stack of confessions, an acknowledgement that guilt had been their companion, and that the love, however strangled, was still there because they both refused to let it vanish without a fight. As he sealed the final envelope, Mara folded the last page of her notebook and set it on top. She didn't close her eyes or smile, but she didn't flinch either. The guilt was still there, pulsing. It hadn't dissolved. But finishing these forms together, hands touching paper and pen, felt like a small, fierce reward. The clinic front desk smelled like disinfectant and metal chairs. Mara's fingers curled around the envelope until Jona took it from her palm. Her knuckles were white. She pulled her scarf tighter, even though the waiting room was warm. A receptionist nodded them toward a side room before Mara could shape a shaky, sideways smile into something steady. Inside, Counselor Ibarra sat at the desk with a small stack of forms. She lifted her chin when Mara set the envelope down. You made it, she said, and the words bounced off the plaster like a reminder. Mara sat without touching the armrests, the envelope resting on her thigh. Jona sat beside her, knee brushing hers, a quiet anchor. Tell me why you brought this today, Ibarra prompted. Mara unfastened the envelope's flap with both thumbs, mouth open the whole time. She pulled out the sheets Jona helped her fill, the lotion-streaked confession from the notebook, the new ones from last night. She looked directly at the counselor when she spoke, then at Jona, as if scoring courage from his face. Because guilt hasn't just been a shadow, she said. It's been the weight that makes me see myself only through what I break. It's made love feel like punishment. Her throat moved. Accountability means I drag all of this up, not tuck it behind some future apology. Jona slid his hand over hers, the pressure steady. I promised I'd do this with her, he said, leaning forward. We can't pretend we're not rotting from the inside. We bring it out together. Ibarra handed Mara a pen. Read it to me, she said. Mara dropped her eyes to the first paragraph. Her voice didn't waver when she read about the nights she left messages unsent, promises she broke, naming love as something to be punished. When she hit the line about guilt suffocating affection, she stumbled, breath catching. Jona leaned in, whispering, We can breathe through it. She nodded once and kept reading until the page was bare. When she finished, Ibarra closed the folder and tapped it with a pen. You didn't arrive here because you failed to keep something hidden, she said. You arrived here because you're confronting the decay that would have eaten the rest of you alive if you kept quiet. Then we keep doing it, Jona said. We keep bringing every rotten piece out. Every night we sit down and say what guilt tries to silence. Mara signed the commitment form with a hand that didn't shake now. "I can't accept myself without telling the truth," she said, watching the ink dry. "And I can't keep pretending a penance is enough without facing the rot." Ibarra slid the signed forms back and placed them beside the envelope. "You've handed over the facts," she said. "Now you hold yourselves accountable by continuing this moment forward. Call me before you go to sleep. Tell me what you confessed to each other tonight." Jona looked at Mara and nodded, a small exhale escaping as if release lurked inside the breath. Mara closed the envelope with a long, deliberate slide of her thumb. When they stood, she kept her hand on Jona's arm as they headed toward the door, already planning the next admission, the next confession, the next night of speaking the truth before guilt could grow again. Jona set the phone beside the kettle and dragged a bright, sticky note onto the counter. 9 o'clock, he said, tracing the words with his finger. "If the counselor's on call, we still get the chime before bed." Mara leaned over the table, her notebook open to a fresh page, ink blotting where she pressed so hard the paper shivered. She ran a thumb along the spiral binding, then stuck a pencil between her teeth to chew. "No skipping," she murmured, tapping the sticky note. 9, every night." He read the next line aloud, voice hollow. "I turned every promise into a sentence." Mara flinched, jerking her hand away from the page. "Say it slow," Jona said. And she slowed, stumbling over the words, the motion already a habit of defense. "I turned every promise into a sentence." He looked up. "You don't get to clean it until you read it as it is." She slid the notebook toward him, and he flipped to the next entry. "The last time we laughed without guilt, I felt like I was treading water with no lungs." Mara's mouth turned down. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "And the guilt never leaves," Jona added, "unless we stop pretending it can. Which we both just promised Counselor Ibarra we wouldn't." The kettle whistled. Mara huffed, turning the dial down with a trembling hand. "Tonight, I'm not trying to be better than the guilt. I'm trying to be together with it," she said. And the words hit the table like a dropped plate. The clatter made both gasp. They folded the confession page into an envelope marked "Tonight." Then Jona slid it across to Mara. "We keep this physically between us," he said, "so it's not a thought you swallow at 3 a.m. She nodded, wrapping her fingers around the envelope, feeling the weight between her palm and the table. "And we swap the burden," Jona continued, pulling a second sticky note from the pad and writing "Guilt check, 3 p.m. Now each of us gets the job of interrupting the silence. I'll text you if I feel the guilt compressing, and you do the same." Mara scribbled, "I will text if guilt feels like a wall beneath." The note went onto the fridge beside the grocery list, right where she sees it before grabbing coffee. The next tension spike came when Mara pulled the envelope back. "I told Counselor Ibarra I'd keep telling you. I didn't say I wouldn't yell about it first." Jona stood, palms open. "Then yell," he replied, voice low. "Just don't swallow it back down into the same place it came from." She huffed, half laughter, half sob, the mix rattling the tea she held. He reached across the table and pressed the heels of his hands against her forearms, silent, grounding them both with pressure more than words. "This guilt isn't going anywhere," he said quietly. "So we'll start making room for it. We don't let it keep eating the air between us." Mara nodded, head dipping, and finally let go of the cup to rest her hands on his. They closed the notebook together, not with finality, but with a snap like the rhythm of taking a breath. Jona slid the envelope into the small box marked "Confessions Tonight," a new box lined with old concert tickets and a Polaroid of them laughing at a storm. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go into the clinic with the box, and we don't pretend the guilt is something we can divorce from the love." Mara rested her forehead against the cool blue tile of the counter for a second, then straightened. "We just learn how to carry it without letting it drag us apart," she replied, tone tight but resolute. They set their phones on the counter, the digital clock already blinking toward 9. Jona reached for Mara's hand, squeezing it once, then 2 more times, counting to 3 silently. 3 breaths, 3 reminders. Mara didn't pull away. "Call me when you're on the couch," she said, "even if it's to read that sentence to me again." "Every night," he answered, pressing the sticky note to the grout as if anchoring it. Outside, the street light flickered on, painting moving shadows across the table and a steady bright spot where the sticky note clung to the fridge. The reward came in the warmth of that small ritual. Confession, acknowledgement, plan. The anxiety eased when they recognized there is no cure yet, only practice. They aren't erased by guilt. They share it willingly, and for tonight, that is enough to keep the love from collapsing. Mara turned off the kitchen light, and the room dimmed except for the glow of the timer on Jona's phone. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his shoulder, the nervousness in her chest pressed into his own breathing. He wrapped an arm around her waist, anchoring them both, and the ticking of the clock sharpened into something like purpose. "Call now?" she whispered. "Call now." Jona tapped the call button and held the phone between them, the counselor's number bright and ready. Their reflections overlapped on the screen. 2 figures illuminated by the same band of light, not fixing anything, just agreeing to carry it forward together. They stood in the dim kitchen, the hush humming like a held breath. Mara's hand rested on the little wooden box, its lid scarred by constant slipping in of folded pages, by the nightly ritual of dragging guilt into the open. Jona's fingers hovered above hers, then settled, the weight of the day folding them together. The envelope from today slipped between them, the confession ink still wet, and Mara used a match to light the candle they never thought they would need. They slid the letter behind the glass, the flame licking the edges, turning words into smudged silhouettes. The smoke curled toward the ceiling, a pale ribbon that would neither disappear nor let them forget what stood in its path. Love stretched thin over the jagged remains of what they failed to forgive, a pulse they now keep alive only by naming its ache aloud. The candle guttering cast long shadows, and they breathed in the scent of the flame, knowing this is how they will go on. Together, never unburdened, forever marked by the truth that their tenderness carries its own ruin.